All right, awesome. Welcome back to the Last Gadfly. This episode is called Deny, Deny, Deny. And it's episode 55 of Dirge for the Charlatans. I'm your host, Stead, and this is...
And I'm Alex. This episode is going to have some difficult subject matter in it. We want to give you guys a warning right now. There are a lot of topics that we're going to talk about dealing with sexual abuse in particular. Right. So if this isn't for you, you may want to skip this one and read the notes.
Absolutely, yeah. And this episode is kind of diverges, right, from a lot of the main topics that we've covered before. It really encapsulates the range that Clay had with his material. The first time we saw it was kind of shocking, wasn't it?
Yes, we weren't honestly looking forward to this episode. Right. But then if you remember the last episode with the interview with Ed Jacobs, one of the last things Clay and Ed talk about is that Nicholas Tartaglione was a victim of priest abuse himself.
That's right, yeah. Which was a shocking revelation in that interview. And a lot of the themes that are in this episode connects with a broader news cycle that didn't exist at the time. And a lot of the questions that we had for each other was why Clay was so consumed with this, right? You know?
Yes, and it speaks to Clay and his eye for journalism and the truth. He was ahead of his time when he found out this stuff and decided to report on it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So without any further pause, we're going to start the episode, and we're going to chime in every time we kind of feel it's something that we can put a light on. So here we go.
Welcome, folks, to Dirge for the Charlatans, part 55. We got a heavy show for you tonight, and I'm going to start off with a quote from the Bible, from the book of Mark in the New Testament, 9:42. And think about this quote as the show evolves. Whosoever shall offend one of these little ones that believe in me, it is better that a millstone were hanged around his neck and he were cast into the sea. Between 1984 and 1992, 400 Roman Catholic priests in North America have been reported for sexually molesting children, mostly boys. Catholic bishops and church officials have covered up many of these cases of Catholic priests abusing children, mostly boys, by allowing these sexual predators of youngsters to evade prosecution and jail time, and even worse, to be able to continue their molestation of children, because priests who have a predilection for molesting sexually children, mostly boys, are engaged in one of the most recidivist of all activities. People who molest children or minors sexually usually do it over and over. In fact, many pedophiles can number over the course of a lifetime hundreds of victims, all of whom are subject to a lifelong misery due to the perversions practiced upon them by their victimizers. Someone who has been sexually abused as a child will often struggle with such demons as depression, sometimes leading to suicide, alcoholism and drug addiction to drown out the pain and the memories, or the need to molest young people themselves, or misplaced anger upon themselves or people close to them. All of this is exacerbated when the victim is falsely accused by the molester or other entities, such as the institution or entity that employs the sexual predators, who inflict such lifelong misery and pain upon the victims, their friends and families, and others with whom they interconnect throughout the victims' lives. Yet incredibly, all too often, this denial by the victimizer is the case when a victim of sexual abuse by a pedophile bravely comes forward to make the accusation of sexual abuse. Catholic priest and novelist Andrew Greeley says that the sexual abuse of children by Catholic priests, quote, may be the greatest scandal in the history of religion in America and perhaps the most serious crisis Catholicism has faced since the Reformation. On July 24th, on July 24th, 1997, an intrepid jury in a federal court case in Dallas, Texas, awarded $120 million in damages to 10 male victims of a Catholic priest who sexually abused them. Also, the family of the 11th victim, who subsequent to his abuse committed suicide, will share in the damages. This priest's name is Father Rudolph Kos, K-O-S. The plaintiff stated that the sexual abuse went on from 1977 to 1992, while the priest was a student at Holy Trinity Cemetery in Dallas, and while he was a priest at 3 churches. This priest, before going to seminary school, had served a year in juvenile detention center for sexually molesting a neighbor. That's before he went to seminary school. This Father Kos also had had a marriage of his annulled by the diocese's marriage tribunal, and his ex-wife, Kathleen Hetzel, stated in a deposition that she had told a Catholic tribunal officer of her former husband's sexual proclivities for young boys. Reverend Gerald Hughes, the diocesan marriage tribunal official, denied at trial that Father Kos's ex-wife had told him that Father Kos was sexually interested in young boys. Who do you believe? Why does that not surprise me? How about you? This is the way the Catholic Church and other groups, such as school systems, have all too often handled sexual abuse cases. That is, blame the victim and deny, deny, deny. Look at Father Ritter, formerly of Covenant House. In an 8-year period, as I said before, 1984 to 1992, the Catholic Church paid out $800 million in damages for sexual abuse by priests, mostly of boys. Father Kos was accused of sexually molesting young altar boys, some as young as 9 years old, in 3 parishes. One victim testified that he was sexually molested by Father Kos several times a week for years. The young casualty was only 13 years old when the priest began his predatory molestation of this 13-year-old boy. Another victim lived for 2 years with the priest in a parish residence. The public was told that the priest had legally adopted the boy. Can you imagine the psychic torment these victims and their families, etc., will have to endure for the rest of their lives? If you are or have been sexually or physically or verbally abused by a clergy person or a teacher or a cop, as in Bedford, New York, or by any other adult when you were a child, when you were a minor, under 17 years of age, report it. And don't report it to just one authority. Report, because cover-ups are always happening in this kind of stuff. Report it to as many people as you can. Please feel free to write to your investigative reporter, Clay Tiffany, P.O. Box 306, Briarcliff Manor, New York, 10510. And if you want it to be, if you don't want to sign your name, you don't have to. But I'll investigate if you want me to. Unbelievably, 2 weeks after the intrepid Dallas jury awarded the record $120 million to 10 male victims of Catholic priest Father Kos and the family of the 11th victim who committed suicide, after the jury found that the Dallas Roman Catholic Diocese had failed to stop Father Kos from sexually abusing parish boys, a Monsignor Robert Ray Kemper, suggested that the boys' parents were at least as much to blame as the church. The mother of 3 victims of Father Kos was properly aghast. Aren't you? She stated, quote, "You can't even say he's in denial. It's a profound arrogance is what we're dealing with," unquote. I should say. Because of the implicit trust that the Catholic Church inculcates in its followers for their parish priests, the mother of these 3 sexually abused boys had allowed her sons to spend considerable time with Father Kos. Only years later did she find out that when Father Kos arranged overnight stays in the rectory for the boys, the priest had given them, this priest, Father Kos, had given them sedatives and alcohol and abused the boys sexually. The ultimate violation. Tom Economos, the co-founder of Link Up, a support group for victims of clergy sexual abuse, it's based in Chicago, said, quote, now follow this, people. For many parents, when priests take an interest in their children, they're happy. They feel honored, elated. The last thing that they ever suspect is that a priest would be molesting their children. Parents are always the last in most of these cases to know. Tom Economos went on to say about this Dallas Monsignor's attempt to lay blame for this priest sexually molesting of children on the parents of the victims, which is called blaming the victim, which later in the show is being done by the New York Archdiocese in regard to the Nauheimer family from Croton, New York. Anyway, the founder of Link Up said, this is a quote now, my immediate reaction is total outrage that a person such as a priest would make such comments. That's probably one of the most unchristian things I've ever heard. Unquote. Another victim of Father Kos, Robert Holtz, who had been sexually ravaged by this pedophile from ages 10 to 14, told of how his devout Catholic parents were not at fault and that his mother, quote, thought being with a priest was the safest place in the world. During this abuse, I felt this was an act of God because of where I was and who the priest was. And I'll finish with the quote from the mother of the 3 sons, all of whom had been sexually molested by this sexual predator, Father Kos, in Dallas, Texas. Quote, a priest, a nun, a bishop to me, that's supposed to be the safest person in the world, the most holy. We all trusted our priest. Most of us didn't have a suspicious bone in our bodies. And now on to a case that was just recently heard in federal court over there in New Haven, Connecticut. And the decision was $750,000 worth of damages. The decision was made on August 26, 1997, to a man, Frank Martinelli, 50 years old, who said he had been sexually abused by a Catholic priest, Reverend Father Lawrence Brett, in the 1960s, and that his Catholic Church diocese in Stamford, Connecticut, covered it up. Apparently, the jury agreed. Ridgefield, Connecticut lawyer Bill Laviano capably represented this victim, who claimed in his lawsuit that Father Brett sexually abused him 3 times, while he, Father Frank Martinelli, was a parishioner at St. Cecilia's Church in Stamford, Connecticut. Anybody that was there at St. Cecilia's that was a teenage boy or younger in Stamford, Connecticut, if you too have been a victim, please write. Feel free to write. The lawsuit alleged that the church diocese knew of similar complaints in the early 1960s The victim said that the diocese should have investigated and warned potential victims, such as himself, Frank Martinelli, while they were still underage and could have received early treatment and therapy. In other words, so they didn't have to go through their lives for decades with this burden upon their soul and psyche. I don't think that's an unfair or untoward request, do you? Do you? According to an August 28, 1997 Ridgefield Press article, Frank Martinelli said that a late-night conversation in 1991 with a fellow victim of Father Brett triggered Martinelli's own repressed memories of being sexually abused by Father Brett back when Martinelli was a minor, age 15 or 16. Martinelli stated to the Ridgefield Press, quote, all of a sudden, imagine you're this man, and somebody else is talking to you about having been abused by this predator. All of a sudden, a wave of feeling just kind of welled up from deep inside me. I'd never felt anything like this before in my life. I started to cry and said to my friend, this is what happened to me. Victim Frank Martinelli went on to say, quote, and then I began what has really been a journey of 5 or 6 years to the point I'm at today. I went to a number of therapists and began to get a deeper understanding of how sexual abuse as a child affected me. The healing process continues. But of course, the innocence that was taken from Frank Martinelli will never be recovered, nor will the years of suffering and pain. According to the Ridgefield Press article, Attorney Laviano's legal team, including his wife Donna and daughter Jennifer, both attorneys themselves, were able to produce a 1964 church memo that was a cover-up disguising the fact that Father Brett back then was sent away for a while. After Father Brett admitted to having a sexual liaison with a 19-year-old male student from Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut in 1964. The church officials made up the excuse of hepatitis for the reason why Father Brett had to go away for a while. Once the church knew about this and Father Brett's admission to having learned of his problem while a priest in Stamford, Connecticut, which is where St. Cecilia's church is located, why didn't the church pursue this and make all his present at the time and former parishioners, especially the minor boys and their parents, aware of the possibility that he may have acted inappropriately with others, male minors, including male minors, because I guess if a priest has homosexual sex with anybody, it's inappropriate, wouldn't you say? This is heavy stuff, isn't it? Such as Frank Martinelli. Incredibly, the Ridgefield Press points out that the church diocesan officials tried to classify their priests as, quote, independent contractors, rather than as employees of the diocese. When one takes into consideration the hierarchical way the Roman Catholic Church is run, from the Pope on down to the parish priests, to try to voice such an argument as the Bishop of Bridgeport, Edward Egan, a pompous soul, I might add, did, that is, that priests are self-employed, really took nerve. How dare you, Father Edward Egan, or Bishop?
Okay, wow, that was pretty heavy. What stuck out to me was hearing Clay describe the psychological damage that this sort of sexual abuse has on its victims. I think that was just straight from his heart, and it shows you that he really cares about this kind of stuff. There was a lot of information there. Mostly he led into this story about Father Kos, who had decades of abuse, decades and decades.
Right. And it's insane, the length of history. Because at the time, right, this is 97, right? And at the time, it was just a settlement. But a year later, Father Kos was convicted in 98 of 3 counts of aggravated sexual assault, sentenced to life in prison. He was denied parole in 2012. And in fact, he's still alive.
And that's crazy to me because Clay never saw that part of the justice system work out. Right. And he was covering this way ahead of his time, and he was maybe even breaking some of this stuff. And we know it to be national news at this point. Right. And he even gets to another national news story when he talks about Father Egan in Connecticut.
Right. And it's kind of like the main theme of that, right? Egan, at that time, was a bishop. And he specifically was tied to a case in Bridgeport with a bunch of abuses that happened there. In 2002, in a letter he read out to Mass, he said, and I quote, "If in hindsight we also discover that mistakes may have been made as regards to prompt removal of priests and assistance to victims, I am deeply sorry." Now that sounds like, a quote where he's taking responsibility, but he actually retracts it. In 2012, Egan retracted that apology. In Connecticut Magazine, he said, "I never should have said that. And I don't think we did anything wrong," which is crazy.
It makes me want to puke. And I think really what this ties together in this story is that we have institutional protection from the church and the police.
Right. Yeah. I think that's what Clay was going for. The church is protecting the priest. The institution is protecting the priest. The police, right, department is protecting the cops. And he sees this link of the power dynamic, the structure that exists in society. What's crazy about, in particular, Egan, because he was a major guy in New York. I remember him when I was a kid, just in the news and stuff. There was another very important quote that I want to bring up, that in 2019, a Supreme Court judge named Holtzberg released the results of an investigation commissioned by another bishop. And it said that Holtzberg found that the Bridgeport bishops over 40 years had consistently failed to fulfill their moral and legal obligations. There's no way Egan didn't know about this, and there's no way Egan didn't cover it up, because in the articles and the work that we read, it talks about how other people, bishops, would complain and he would dismiss them. Right. So what was he doing? What was he really thinking? I think protecting his priests was more important than protecting the innocent children in his care.
Yeah, it's truly diabolical stuff. Your kids are supposed to be in the safest place, as he said many times, when they're around the clergy. But they're simply not, especially then. I wish things are better nowadays, but
I mean, it's terrible. This episode in particular, like the more we got into watching it and really doing the research, it really struck a chord with us morally, because Clay was this is a half-hour dirge, right? So it was shorter than the other dirges, which is an hour long. And Clay speaks at times looking into the camera. You could see him just taking these really deep breaths. It's so heavy for him, and heavy for anybody, but remarkable the amount of the lengths that the priests, the church went to protect these criminal, corrupt priests, which is disgusting behavior. Unbelievable, right, Alex?
Yeah. Well, let's keep watching and see where it goes.
Yeah. Enjoy. Try to.
Why did the diocese try to hide the egregiously wrongful activity of Father Brett? One can only guess at how many others were victimized by this Roman Catholic priest, Father Brett. Usually, pedophiles have a recidivist propensity, as I said before, to sexually abuse minor after minor after minor. And now on to a present situation of interest. Now, remember, as I discussed the David Horner situation, these are allegations. They haven't been proven in court. The court case is coming up. I invite you to stay tuned. Your investigative reporter, Clay Tiffany, will be covering this over there in the town of Southeast courtroom, which is basically Brewster, New York, which is right across the border from my Connecticut audience, right across the border from from parts of my Westchester audience, and in my CTEC audience. Okay? Anyway, on September 5th, 1997, according to court papers, David Horner, age 55, of 8 Lily Drive, Danbury, Connecticut, stands accused of endangering the welfare of a child by driving into the town of Southeast, New York, in the Vales Grove community on Peach Lake in the Brewster, New York area. According to the court document, David Horner, age 55, asked an underage boy, quote, listen to this. This is alleged by this minor boy. Quote, how can I get into your pants? Unquote. The minor boy then reported this sexual solicitation to his parent, who then notified the New York State Police. Several community residents of Vales Grove are up in arms. How would you out there react if somebody in your neighborhood was alleged to have been so accosted? According to well-placed sources, David Horner of 8 Lily Drive, Danbury, Connecticut, where this show airs, was driving around Vales Grove asking directions of teenage boys before David Horner allegedly asked the complainant, an underage boy, quote, how can I get into your pants? Which the boy and others have taken to mean that David Horner was intending to solicit a sexual encounter with this minor boy from the Brewster, New York area. At first, according to New York State Police sources, only a violation charge of harassment was filed by the Putnam County DA's office against David Horner of Danbury. A state police source agreed with your investigative reporter that if the allegation were true, not charging David Horner with a misdemeanor, which would give him a criminal record, would be inappropriate. Even though I left numerous messages with the Putnam County DA's office, believe me, many, they never replied to my queries as to why this allegation was not classified as a misdemeanor crime. Finally, who knows why? Possibly because they knew I've covered stuff that they've done inappropriately in the past, and they know who I am. Very sure of that. Finally, on October 14th, 1997, the Putnam County DA's office upgraded the charge against David Horner for allegedly saying to the Brewster, New York boy, how can I get into your pants, to endangering the welfare of a minor, which is a misdemeanor. According to New York State penal law, quote, a person is guilty of endangering the welfare of a child when he knowingly acts in a manner likely to be injurious to the physical, mental, or moral welfare of a child less than 17 years old, or directs or authorizes such child to engage in an occupation involving a substantial risk of danger to his life or health. The reason a misdemeanor charge is so important is, if the allegation is true, remember it has to be proven in court, then if there is a conviction, David Horner will have a criminal record. And if he were ever to solicit another underage boy, the first allegation would have bearing. All of this is assuming the Brewster boy's allegation is true and David Horner is found guilty in the town of Southeast Court when the case comes to trial. Remember, you're innocent until proven guilty. By the way, is it possible that because David Horner went across state lines from Danbury to Brewster, New York area, that he should be charged with another crime in regard to the allegation made by the minor boy who lives in Vales Grove, New York, that David Horner solicited him sexually by asking him, "How can I get into your pants?" Now, something of interest to many of you. Connecticut has a new law, sex offender law, which took effect on October 1st, 1997, which requires each and every local police department in Connecticut to make registries of sexual offenders available. Apparently, not all Connecticut police departments are following the new regulations. According to the New York Times, out of a sample study of 6 departments, only 2 provided registries of sexual offenders, of a list of sexual offenders, when a request was made. 3 police departments in Connecticut were unsure of their sexual offender, if their sexual offender registries were available, and 1 police department, that of Fairfield, Connecticut, refused to show the sexual offender registry and said that they had to refer the request to their town attorney. States, now the reason for this, and the reason that states have been passing sexual offender laws, is because of a situation involving a 7-year-old little girl by the name of Megan Kanka of Hamilton Township, New Jersey, who was brutally raped and strangled by an already convicted sexual child molester who was living across the street from the Megan Kanka family, unbeknownst to the Kankas. Thus, they were not forewarned about this sexual predator before he struck again, raped, and killed their innocent child, Megan. Since sexual predators of minors, as I stated previously, usually do it over and over and over, the Megan's Law was enacted to warn parents, friends, neighbors, if a sexual predator is nearby. Now, we have just across the border, and it might be of interest, I've already had people discuss it to me when I've been in Ridgefield. And by the way, I appreciate you people in Ridgefield and Danbury that have come up to me and the other jurisdictions that I cover, coming up to me and thanking me for my shows and giving me more information. Anyway, across the border in Bedford, New York, there's a cop named Matthew Dunn who is, in his federal lawsuit, has alleged that when he was only 13 years old, he was molested by a guy named Joseph Peters, who was then a Bedford town cop. After 6 years of being a Bedford town cop himself, Matthew Dunn one day had his memory triggered by watching fellow cop Joseph Peters leave a bathroom at the Bedford police station with an underage boy, a young boy, and by hearing Peters talk to a youth on the phone using the same language and moves that Peters had used years before on Matthew Dunn when he was only 13. And according to his lawsuit, sexually violated by then Bedford town cop Joseph Peters. There might be victims of Joseph Peters who, subsequent to revelations about his iniquitous activity, committed suicide. There might be victims out there, and please write to Clay Tiffany. Matthew Dunn I'm running out of time, so I'm going to summarize this. Basically, Matthew Dunn, in his federal lawsuit, alleges that Janine Pirro's Westchester County DA's office, even though they were apprised of this perfidious activity by then Bedford Town cop Joseph Peters, did nothing for 6 months. Then Chief Martin, who was the chief at the time, went to the New York State Police, who did the right thing. They did an investigation. They found out that this guy Peters had molested a young boy under 15, and when Peters was found out about this, he did the cowardly thing and committed suicide. So the beat goes on. Thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next Dirge for the Charlatans.
All right, so what we just watched was Clay tying in a national Catholic abuse story to more of a local one. He asked the viewer to write in and give us their stories of abuse. So this is personal to him and it's local.
Right, and I think specifically locally, he was talking about the Dunn case, and I wanted to remind you guys, the Dunn case specifically was a Bedford officer named Joseph Peters that had sexually abused Dunn at the age of 13. And Dunn later claimed that his memories were triggered when he was working for the Bedford police himself. The biggest part of that is he informed Janine Pirro's office, and according to Clay, they did nothing for 6 months, right? Which is contrasting with his own experience reporting his crimes to Pirro, right? It's incredible that they would slow walk this, and for what reason?
It's incredible. What it really says is that the police and the justice system protect police and the justice system. Right. The priests protect priests. The clergy and the cops protect each other. There's
Right.
sort of a cycle of protection and power.
Institution workers, whether it's police and cops, whether it's the church and it's incredible that he draws these lines. And the more we watch these episodes, the more you're going to see he connects these. And a lot of the stuff we know today was not available for him. There was no spotlight. There was no registry of corrupt priests sexually abusing kids. They kind of like sent them around to other churches the way you would a killer whale in SeaWorld. You ship them to another place. It's unbelievable the lengths they went to protect their own, giving out lawsuits, hundreds of millions of dollars.
And then when they do catch Joseph Peters, he doesn't face justice. He just offs himself, which is disgusting. And it's not going to be the first police to off themselves in this grand story arc of ours, just so you know.
Right, yeah. There's a lot of stuff that's going to happen in the future with the episodes where it's going to reveal itself over time, but it's incredible the lengths, how deep this episode got. It gave me goosebumps watching it because the subject matter is so difficult, but also the passion that Clay had to pursue justice for people that couldn't protect themselves. And I think he was a hero for that, right? Protecting the downtrodden, protecting the people that don't have a voice. And he had a voice. He had a voice for the people that didn't have one, it's remarkable. Clay was a lot of things to a lot of people, but I think to us, he's starting to become more of like a crusader. Like I really see the better part of him, and that's where I want to start and stop with Clay. Everyone's has their own flaws. No one's perfect, but this guy really he took a lot of risk in his own life to present this stuff, right?
Yeah, and he was a victim himself of the powers that be,
Absolutely.
The justice system, the police, they didn't do him any favors.
Absolutely not, And that was episode 55, Deny, Deny, Deny. The next episode is 59 actually, and it's going to be coming out in a week. We're really excited to present more to you. And thanks so much for watching this super difficult episode. I hope we don't really cover this part again.
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
But we really appreciate you watching. Please like and subscribe.
See you soon.